How's it going, everyone? Session here. Welcome to Dead by Daylight. We have ourselves, and forgive me for being a day late, the developer update in regarding to stats for the game. This was updated as of February 15th, and so I guess it's a special edition because it's not going to be about, perks and killers and incoming updates and that sort of thing. I guess it's about talking about, how are the cast doing overall performance-wise in terms of survivability, which people are playing what killers versus whatsoever. So let's check it out. Since we started regularly sharing stats last year, we received various requests for different kinds of data you would like to see. On top of the usual statistics we share, we selected a few of the most requested topics to share with you today. Before we dive in, we would like to remind everyone that while data may be fun to talk about, it does not paint a full picture. The numbers we'll be sharing are very broad, covering millions of matches played across the entire world, so numbers may not reflect your personal experience. We encourage you to have fun discussing this info, but please try to not draw any conclusions from data alone. It's important to dig deeper to understand the context behind the numbers you see, even if you don't make decisions based on data on its own. Okay. Popular perks. Starting things off, here's an update to the 10 most popular perks for each role. The percentage listed next to each perk indicates their usage rate. In other words, likelihood someone will have it in their loadout. Arrows indicate if the perk has moved up or down since the list we last shared stats, while a line shows that they remained in the same spot. Okay, so we have Windows opportunity 32%. It makes sense that it's been that perk that people have been running since the beginning of time, that the perk has been around, because just having the information for finding where the pallets are versus windows and like which ones are real or not real based on which killer you're up against, having windows be number one it's been very clear that I still see people to this day use that perk, so that makes sense. Adrenaline being number two is interesting. I think the only reason why it is number two is because it's just, they got rid of a lot of other perks that people don't use as much as, before. So it being at 23% number two makes total sense. Live makes sense as well because, being able to use a window jump and live together to stall and get away from the killer is very powerful in combo, so it does make sense. Resilience being number four is actually interesting. I actually don't know if I often see people use resilience, but it is pretty cool to see that. I like that perk as well. The only thing I don't like about resilience though is that it doesn't work anymore and like well with is it Calm Spirit, when you basically don't make noise while you're injured. Um or whatever that perk is called. I don't think it's called Calm Spirit. I think Calm Spirit is the crow perk. Whatever the perk, oh, it's Iron Will. Sorry, I completely blanked on it. So yeah. Um Resilience Iron Will is a nice combo, just because like you don't like really hearing the grunts of you being injured the entire time, and it's kind of annoying. Um, I wish that I would use Iron Will Resilience together if it was 100%, but Iron Will clearly isn't on this list, but Resilience is, so good perk. Deja Vu being number five is definitely like makes total sense. The rework on that perk is incredibly powerful, and now that it's practically like a better perk than I would say, I don't know, most perks in the entire game. It's not terrible, and it's very, very, very good. Like, it's very good. The reason why I value it so highly now is mostly because I play solo, and so because of the solo play from my end, I like to be able to understand what three generators are closer together, and then using my brain and let the map knowledge. Out of the three generators that are close by, I like to pick the one that kind of like creates the most or the least amount of distance between the remaining generators that are on in the field, pretty much. So if there's a middle generator, then we just try to prioritize that one, and the repair speed for that is also super nice. So I really appreciate that Deja Vu is the perk that it is. It's actually a really cool perk, so I'm very grateful for that one. Self-care being number six and still being used at 15% is also pretty interesting. Here's the thing though, I don't think people use self-care because it's a perk that's good that gets frequently used. This is obviously like, if you know, but like it's the worst perk in the entire Survivor roster perk list. So, but I think the reason why it's so frequently used is because when people buy the game for the very first time and you only have access to the characters you have access to that are not DLC inclusive, like people will look at, perks from Jake, Nia, Meg, and Claudette and realize like, oh, Claudette's like a healer. She's got a self-healing perk. That's awesome. So I think everyone just gravitates to this one for that single reason alone. The other reason, however, is because people use like meme randomizer things on like the streaming world, if you will. So a lot of times those websites, when you just randomly do like a build and it just gives like a random list of perks and add-ons to use, self-care is just on that list sometimes. So I think that's also why. Like the utility of self-care is very bad, but because of the easy accessibility at a very early stage into the game upon somebody purchasing the game, and the combination of it being used as like a randomizer thing, it just makes sense that it's at number 6. But it's really unfortunate because it's like the worst perk in the entire game, but you know, it's kind of hard to actually really digress that. So you know, here we are. Sprint burst being number 7 makes sense, and it having an increase as well also makes sense, just because, you know, the other perks that we used to utilize with either mobility or covering our tracks and that sort of thing, you know, those movement perks got brought to the ground pretty much. Like made for this was like the perk you use at the time, right? So because they didn't have that perk to the ground, sprint burst making a comeback is actually, it makes sense pretty much. So there's that. Dead hard being brought up to 12%. I think it's a similar thing with self-care where like, not that you can get David early per se, but because David is a character that has this perk, and if people try to look up older guides on like good perks to use in the game sort of thing, Dead Hard is one of those perks, you know, because it's been a legendary perk and kind of gone through the roller coaster of dramatized nerfs and buffs across the board. I mean, more nerfs if anything, but you know, it's still frequently used even to this day by everybody because like it's a good perk despite how bad it's been nerfed to the ground, and people still complain about it in its worst form yet, and they've even made it even worse and it's still so frequently used. So I don't know, I feel like they got to figure out something with this perk. I don't know what though exactly, because I don't use it, but I understand that it's a perk that killers really hate no matter how much it's been complained about. So there's that. Bond, I think, is similar again with like self-care, where like because it's a Dwight perk, you get it really early on. It gives you information about where your friends and teammates are, and that has nothing to do with any kind of status. It's just like if they're close by, you can see them, you get an idea as to what's going on. It's really helpful. But again, I feel like if you know, if you're starting off picking this perk, it just makes sense. But if you've been playing for like a while, you'll definitely lean towards a lot of the other perks that are available. So Bond being number 9 is interesting. And then Kindred being number 10 just makes sense because it's a common perk that everyone gets to use. If you notice, it's the only perk out of this entire listing besides Resilience and Deja Vu. Like these 3 are the only ones that are like common perks, right? So it makes sense. Like Resilience is still really good, and like Deja Vu got better, so that's why it's frequently used. But Kindred's always been really good just because it does what it does. And I also do love Kindred as a perk as well. So this being the top 10 list is good. Now, overall though, like if you remember what they said earlier, that they don't want people to think that these listings are going to give you like the indication of like what's best or not best. Because again, like Windows is, in my personal opinion, I would say like Windows is like a mid-tier perk. I understand how amazing it is, you know, when you're doing chasing and whatnot, but for my personal preference and playstyle, Windows is a very mid-tier perk. I've never used it. I actually think it's overbearing in terms of information. It kind of overwhelms me when I use it. Adrenaline's good. I use it once in a while. Lithe, same thing with Sprint Burst. Like those 3 I kind of use in a similar fashion. I love Resilience if I can take advantage of it, and like I have a way of how I like using Resilience, but if I play solo, it's kind of hard to use Resilience. Deja Vu is like my required perk right now. I bring this perk with me everywhere I go all the time, no questions asked. Self-care, worst perk in the game. Everyone knows this. I do believe they need to buff this perk quite a bit, actually. Dead Hard. I never liked actually using Dead Hard. I have a really hard time with using Dead Hard, and again, personal preference in terms of like my play style. It's not a skill issue thing. It's just more so that like I just don't really benefit from like that Dead Hard variance of maybe the killer will hit me sort of thing. I'd rather just not even use it and use a perk that I can actually like use that fits my playstyle. Bond I do find helpful, but I've recently gravitated towards other perks that give me aura readings that kind of have like a, you know, like a caveat to it, like aftercare. Like I like using aftercare over Bond, but I do see that this perk is very helpful in Intel Merit as well. And Kindred's same thing with like Deja Vu. I don't bring it with me everywhere that I go, but I do enjoy this perk a lot, and I feel like it hasn't needed to change at all, but we'll see kind of what they do. Next, we got the killer side of things. Oh boy. Pop being number 22% and number 1 perk makes just so much sense. It's really bad though, because there was a time when this perk was very good in the earlier days of its life cycle. It got like a nerf sort of, but then they added like the base kit version of it, and now it's gotten better, and that just kind of is what it is. But Pop is of course now an extremely good perk in what it's worth, so I totally get that. What's that? Pain Res? Pain Res, of course, I mean, it's been a goated perk since the beginning of time. There's never been a reason for them to never ever like not run Pain Res. So like Pain Res existing even after all the time that the game has existed and people have hated the perk, it's still just really good at what it does. So I kind of understand it that it's like number 2. So there's that. Sloppy Butcher. Unfortunately, Sloppy Butcher is just that perk that I can't stand. It's really crazy how frequent it, and I think a lot of people might also feel that way about it too, because it's going to be getting some kind of address in a future update where they're going to probably look into nerfing it to some degree. So we'll see what they do with that. Not too sure yet though. We'll find out for sure over the course of time. But it being number 3 just makes sense. It's a common perk that everyone can use very quickly, very early, and like it's just so good. Healing is very bad in the game at the moment in its current condition. Like healing either needs to get buffed or this perk needs to be like harshly nerfed, not even like a minor. It needs like a harsh nerf. Surge/Jolt is surprisingly a perk that people, you know, still use frequently to this day, and I'm on the same boat. Like I understand that it's a very good perk and kind of giving you, because you know the application of it is simple, but it does so much and with very little effort. So you really get a lot of information with Surge or Jolt if you know the name. So, but it decreasing and going down to number 4 slot is actually interesting. I mean, it's not number 4 because of its uncommonality of use in comparison. It's just that the other 3 perks ahead of it are just that much better after their changes, that like this perk, it fell number 4 because these 3 perks are just much better in terms of how killers play, that this one's still very effective. It's just not popularly picked on a constant basis. Corrupt being number 5 makes sense. Again, it's a perk that I feel like people really were unsure about, like whether they need to use it or that sort of thing. And I think it also got like a nerf because of the you know, whenever you get a person hooked, I believe it is, right, then the perk stops working. But even still though, like if you actually just try to use it as like a combinational setup, then it actually still becomes a very powerful perk, because again, just the fact that they you know, the 3 generators that get blocked, and then once the first survivor gets put down, then the perk just deactivates itself. You can still, if you actually utilize the time of the perk versus just going for the quick down, then the perk still sees incredible usage because you can stall for 2 minutes on a lot of different levels, and it's really good at what it does. So its increased popularity despite the nerf makes a lot of sense. Save the best for last is another one of those perks that it's a very overly optimized perk in terms of its use and application. And unfortunately, people understand that it's a very good perk, and there are so many caveats and workarounds to this perk that, you know, the devs are really trying to change killers so that this perk's affectation is not as easily applied, which is unfortunate. Because there are certain killers that just benefit from this significantly, and they're not technically supposed to, but its popular use just also kind of lets that weigh in itself really well. So save being number 6 makes sense to me. Barbecue is brought down to number 7. I don't know where it was last time, but what I can tell you is that barbecue is actually a very frequent perk that used to like be very all over the place, and now it's definitely like lost a lot of its value and luster. It's still good at what it does though. And if you have certain killers or create certain scenarios and builds and certain maps, then the perk still sees a lot of really good usage. But I personally can tell you that I haven't seen this perk as common in comparison. Like for me, the big 5 is Pop, Pain Res, Sloppy, Corrupt, and actually Save. Surprisingly enough, Surge Jolt isn't too frequently put on there, but it definitely does see its value from time to time. And then, of course, we got NOED. Now, NOED is such a popular and frequent perk for various reasons. One, again, similar to like resilience and self-care, for example, the concept of NOED just is really good conceptually for killers to use, and the affectation of it works so incredibly well that like a lot of beginner killer players will start using this perk. But also this perk has seen very advanced play by higher end level killer players because they understand that um they try to cause as much mischief and havoc as possible during the early and mid game of the match, and then once they reach the end game and then all the generators somehow do get powered up, this is kind of like that final trump card. And like the variance of it is so bad sometimes that like what you're supposed to do, right, is if you get a hook on a person or down rather, and you know where Noed is, then you basically put the person on the hook near Noed, and then just kind of guarantees the kill in that scenario, preventing Noed from being destroyed. Um, that's just one of those unfortunate, like smooth brain but big brain like plays you can do as a killer, and then it just makes it a guaranteed kill for the killer, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it is what it is. Um, then we got Lethal Pursuer. This perk is still extremely commonly used, especially when it's combined with other perks that give you aura reading in any way, shape, and form, and that also includes add-ons, right? So it's not even that it's gotten a nerf or it's gotten worse over the course of time. It's just that the way how they've been changing the meta and what perks and what characters and killers and all that stuff being used, like Lethal Pursuer has still seen incredible usage just because of what it's worth. So it's still a really popular perk. It's just not, up there anymore because it's other perks are kind of taken over. And last but not least, we have ourselves Bamboozle. Now, this perk is still just really good at what it does. So it like doesn't really matter like in any way, shape, and form, right? Like it's just such a good perk. Because it just makes life a lot easier for a lot of killers who have issues with vaulting and whatnot. So it definitely, whatever perk that was here that was number 10, I feel like it might have been hmm trying to think about what's that other nemesis perk? Eruption? Yeah, I think Eruption was on this list, and eventually Eruption fell off the map because of the nerf that they had, and then they just put Bamboozle here instead, and it does just see a lot of play. So Bamboozle is a very good perk. So there we go. Now you got popular killers. Like perks, we've also tallied up the 10 most popular killers over the past month. The number below represents the percentage of all matches where that given killer was played, with the arrows and lines again indicating how they have changed popularity since last we started the data. Okay, so here we've got the killer picks from December to January. Now, this listing is very interesting. I'm very curious as to how they get this list in comparison to all the other killers. So starting with number 1, we got Chucky. Of course, him being introduced into the game was such a huge, massive W, because literally his power is really cool. He's a very stealthy, scary killer, and I really like him. Of course, he hasn't, he's seen his fair share of issues and nerfs and changes to his kit and his powers and perks that he brings to the table. So, but that doesn't stop him from being a very popularly used killer. So him being number 1 just makes total sense. I think that every other match you might play against, you might find out that there's a Chucky involved. So just like be mindful of that too. So Huntress being number 2 makes sense. Huntress is also a very popular, just frequently used killer just because her power is very easy to use and it makes sense. And that simplicity does, shift into effectiveness. So her power is just very good and there's just no reason to discuss it. It really pains me to see that Wraith is number 3. And, I just, man, okay. Chucky's a very high level tier killer in my personal opinion. Huntress is in the same boat if you can build her correctly. People consider Wraith to be like a low tier killer, and he's kind of a problem in that regard. I don't know where people feel that way. I mean, I say this all the time, but I hate Wraith like a lot in terms of how he's played. The speed boosting post the uncloak is really obnoxious, and the ability to cancel the cloak and then kind of debate people is also like a really weird pain point for me. But anyways, I do see Wraith very frequently, which is unfortunate because it kind of does deter me away from playing the game a little bit when I found out that it is a Wraith. But it's weird. Either way, though, Wraith being number 3 does make sense to me. I'm surprised he's number 3. I figured that he'd be like top 10, but not number 3. So he's really high up there in comparison. Legion actually does make sense to me, and also getting the increase of that 5% in comparison to the rest of the killers is just, I think people are learning that Legion can actually be a very obnoxious killer to go up against, and it's just a situation that it boils down to. Like Wraith really can, like, the match will get so extensively long versus a Legion that people either just give up or the killer just ends up eventually just getting the final nail in the coffin sort of ordeal. So I don't know. I feel like with Chucky, Huntress, and Wraith, you can definitely eventually get away with, even in a quick amount of time if you really play your cards right. But with Legion, I think no matter how you play your cards, you can never get away from the Legion in a quick time. I think it's always going to be like a 20 to 30-minute match, basically. At least that's how my matches have always been against Legion. I've never had a Legion match where it didn't last like 30 minutes when people were using perks and Lotus and whatnot. So there's that. Wesker decreasing is only because of the inclusion of Chucky. Wesker is still top 5, easily still one of the best kills in the entire game. Very, very fun to play as, very fun to play against, up until a certain point. But Wesker being number 5 just makes sense. Trapper is only number 6 because Trapper is an introduction killer that has a very simple mindset of playing the game. He's very easy. I think literally because it says that difficulty for him is easy to play, people play Trapper for that reason alone. So it's not like, Wraith is medium and Huntress is medium and Nurse is very difficult, right? So the other killers, I mean, Hillbilly as well, but he's not on this list, right? But all the other killers you can play at an introductory level, he's the only one that's next to Hillbilly in terms of the easy category. So him being number 6 just makes sense for that reason alone. Myers being number 7 is kind of a hilarious meme because he's also considered like not a good killer and everything included. However, he's the only killer that actually has the capability of really being scary in the game. And I think a lot of people understand that in the community. I'm thankful that he's number 7. And I'm also thankful that this isn't like an indicative tier list of who's good in the game and who's not good. Because, Trapper, I think Trapper's gotten the change that they made with Trapper is definitely a buff, and it's really good for him to get the speed boost as the planting a trap kind of thing. But, you got like S tier, like S minus, A plus, B apparently, or C minus, whatever people say. Like Myers is like bottom 3. But because he's so much fun to play against, it's really enjoyable to go up against him. So I appreciate that Myers is on this list. Nurse being number 8 is interesting. I feel like people are usually overwhelmed by Nurse, but again, it gets problematic when you go up against a really good Nurse because Nurse is just so insanely powerful that it's really, really difficult to deal with a Nurse. It doesn't matter if the Nurse is very new to the game or have been playing the game for an eternity. Like you'll encounter that Nurses are very difficult to deal with, and escaping from a Nurse is pretty challenging in its own merit, even for one singular chase. Blight being number 9 and getting the increase is actually interesting. I'm not too sure how. They must have been number 10 at some point, but I don't actually remember. Blight and Nurse kind of go hand in hand as like a combo. They're both like the speed demon killers. Like they're really fast. They move very quickly. They get the job done, and they're really tough to play against. So Blight is, again, that killer that I appreciate existing in the game. Very fun to play as and tricky to deal with. And just overall like a really big challenge. But again, good Blight players are really rare, but they're absolutely ferocious. And lastly, we have Ghostface, who, again, I think similar to the Myers ordeal, like Ghostface is a very popular killer in the cinematic world, and the concept of playing Ghostface is really cool by nature. But again, not the best killer and not the worst compared to like Myers, but he's in that category where like he's just, he's very famous and popular in the movies, so people like playing him with the intention to scare people. And also, I think he's a bit of a meme in comparison as well, so him being number 10 just makes sense. There's no killer that immediately comes to my mind that I'm surprised is not on this list, but I feel like there should be. Spirit should be on this. Actually, no, Spirit is definitely not on this list. Not Spirit, sorry. I was thinking about no, I guess it was Spirit. I don't know. I feel like Dredge should also be on this list, but I guess if it's only in the past month, the information is kind of tough to utilize. Because like Xenomorph would also, I feel like should be on this list considerably, but I think the amount of data that they have to pull from this as a result is difficult. So this list would absolutely change significantly if it was covering the entire year versus the last final, previous month basically. Beyond the top 10, pick rates are as follows. Oh, cool. So for sake of simplicity, they run the numbers as a whole percentage. So yeah, Doctor, Deathslinger. Okay, Spirit would have been 13. Doctor is also up there too. Doctor is definitely like top 10 if it wasn't Ghostface for sure. Nemesis I do see all the time. I don't see Trickster often, but I know Trickster is pretty frequent. Oni is definitely up there as well. I'm surprised that there's not a lot of Oni players. At least within the past like 30, 30 days that this metric was measured basically. Clown is also a very frequent one. Xenomorph makes sense. Hillbilly, I'm surprised is not up there, but I think also people get turned away from Billy because of the fact that he was not good. But I think the new rework is going to actually bring him up quite a bit. Onryo, I'm surprised is actually not that high. I feel like if it wasn't going to be Ghostface or Trapper, then Onryo would have definitely fit on this list, especially after the change that they gave her too when she was like crazy strong. I'm surprised that Onryo is only 2%. Let's see. Executioner demo. Okay. Cannibal seen by Skull Merchant. This is higher than I realized that it is. Oh, Pig as well. Oh my gosh. Like, I feel like I see pigs all the time. So the fact that I don't actually see Pig on that list is interesting to me. Dredge, surprisingly enough, it does make sense. Artist as well. Hag. People literally don't play Nightmare because like Freddy's just the worst killer in the entire game, and he has been for a very long time, so it's really unfortunate. Singularity is the weirdest killer and definitely the most underrated Nightmare out of all of them. It's probably the strongest. I think contendingly, it's probably top 5 strongest killer if you know how to play him because he's really insane. And lastly, we have Twins. Twins has been kind of fighting this percentage for a really long time. Definitely the most infrequently used killer, and it has been that way for a very long time. So long, in fact, that I think that they're actually reworking Twins and fixing the killer to kind of give players a reason to want to play them again. So hopefully we'll see what that looks like. Next up, we got the deadliest killers. Ooh, that's a really unfortunate pair to see. Who spilled blood the most last month? Many of you wanted to know, so we gathered the data to share with you this time around. Number below are percentage of all survivors who are killed when facing them, for example. A 50% kill rate would mean that they kill 2 survivors per match on average. We try to keep the killers near 60% kill rate on average to keep matches relatively even and support the horror theme of the game, where the killer is a force to be reckoned with and the survival rate is not guaranteed. We'd like to remind you again that this data covers millions of matches across all skill levels. Some killers may be stronger than mastered, but less powerful and handsome, less experience. A good nurse is much scarier. Kill rates do not include matches where a disconnect takes place. Interesting. This is okay, interesting. So Skull Merchant being number 1, having 70% is insane. Now you got to remember too, all MMR kill rates for the past month, right? They want to keep them near 60% on average. But the fact that they showcase that Skull Merchant is 70% is really bad, actually. Personally, I've never liked Skull Merchant. Like, I just, the concept of the killer, I think a lot of people just don't like the killer in general. I'm on that same boat, honestly. I don't like dealing with Skull Merchant. I think till this day, in my many matches of going up against them, even against like bad or like new players, I still don't survive Skull Merchant. It's just such a weird situation killer wise. I can't stand it. So there's that. Onryo, same thing. What I'll tell you though too is like Onryo had the issue of the old tape working. Although I think they actually reworked it even still. But either way though, Onryo and Skull Merchant, in my opinion, are 2 killers that are like, if you don't know how to deal with their power, then there's just no chance of survival. But Skull Merchant's got that one leg up where she's actually so annoyingly strong that like it's just difficult to deal with no matter what level it is. So that's her case. Onryo, I feel like people don't really care about the power enough to deal with it, that they end up getting the condemned to the max, and then they get moried as a result. It really ends up being unfortunate in that case scenario. Both of these killers, kill rates are way too high. Like, you know, they want to keep him at 60, but I understand how difficult that is, but this is still way too high. Cenobite is deceptively 63%. I genuinely disagree with that number. I think that it's also closer to the 67% and 70 range. It probably sits right underneath Onryo, which you would think like, oh, like 3% difference ain't that big of a deal, but it really is. The reason why this is the case though for Cenobite is because people play against Cenobite very with just they try to play with accuracy, and the builds that you can come up with as Cenobite is so disgustingly unbearable to deal with that, like, you know, I feel like this metric, granted it says that it doesn't include matches where disconnects take place, I feel like this only occurs in the event that, like, I don't know, I feel like this message is not really true to nature, because I can tell you with certainty that if the match, let's say like you're playing with Ario and like you're in the middle of being moried and you just turn your console or your PC off, I think the kill still counts despite the disconnect. I really don't feel like they're just saying that like you know, like if if a person gets downed first and then disconnect, I feel like that may not count. But if someone is on the hook and, you know, then they get unhooked and then they're about to get moried and then during the mori they disconnect, I think that does count. Additionally, this doesn't really equate to when people get hooked first and then they immediately start taking the sacrifice and they just kind of skip to the second hook and then don't try to use their struggle and then they just die instantaneously. I already know for a fact that that metric is in this, which will also explain why a lot of these killers' percentages are way too high. It's not because of the killer being good or not. It's literally because when you go up against a certain killer, you'll be so frustrated that it's that killer that you don't want to really disconnect, but you want to just die so you can get into the next game. All these killers have this issue, at least to a degree. So I'm not really opposed, and I'll go into further detail with it as well. So Cenobite's another good example. When you find out that the Cenobite is using that hoarder combo with the box and playing really obnoxious with the whole thing, then yeah, eventually you just kind of sit there, and then if you get the hook, you can just GG go next in that scenario. Nightmare slash Freddy, same ordeal, honestly. Like, it may not seem like it, but you know, Freddy is the worst killer in the entire game, and despite that, he's still really annoying to deal with power wise, and they just gotta rework Freddy. His kill rate being so high is just because his power and application is annoying just enough for the similar reasons to the previous three killers, where like if you get downed by Freddy, it's like embarrassing to get killed by Freddy. So instead of like just trying to play the game to its full, you just get the sacrifice hook and you just try to get into the next game and hope you don't get another Freddy. Plague is a very good killer, and honestly, 62% for her is fine. It's not too high, it's not too low, it's fine. Like, going up against a Plague, even like a good Plague, you still have an even chance of being able to like effectively get away from her, and that number just honestly is, it's pretty accurate and true to what it is, so I'm actually okay with that. Pig is, and also remember this is also the case scenario where, you know, their kill percentage on average, right? They guarantee at least get, so all these killers guarantee 2 kills on average. Some cases they get higher, right? So just kind of refreshing that out there. Like, Plague getting 2 kills is pretty frequent, I would say. It's very frequent. Even I can say so for myself as a Plague player myself. So like, but it's not annoying to go up against her, but she is very good. So there's that. Pig is honestly in the same boat, but I think that it's because of how people play Pig. I don't think that Pig is a good killer to the best degree. Not bad, but not good. But I think that the combination and an RNG of the trap situation, and then once you find the person, you've got no reason not to tunnel them. And so just to kind of guarantee that kill with Pig just makes total sense. And so 61% is pretty accurate as well to that case scenario. So there's Pig. Dredge being 61 also is interesting. I think that Dredge is one of those killers that people really just take for granted because they feel like the killer is either like good or not good. It's really hard to really determine which one is the option in that case scenario, but Dredge is unfortunately a very, very good killer and just has so much going in its power that it's really good. It's a really good design to killer though, so I'm not really opposed, but you know, it's very hard it's very hard to get away from a dredge unless you absolutely communicate to the highest degree, right? Or if the person playing the killer is just bought the game today. Next, we got Spirit. Spirit is kind of in the same boat as Dredge. Very good killer, pretty obnoxious killer to go up against. The power of Spirit is kind of tough to deal with. I'm surprised that it's lower than Plague. I feel like Spirits would be kind of in between Cenobite and Amrio at like 65%, but I do understand that it's, 2 kills, right? I feel like deceptively. If the number was counting for like a full sweep, I think these numbers would be very different, but I don't know. I think that the 61% for Spirits is interesting. Then we got Myers. Now, I feel like the reason why Myers, is up here, simply put, is because of the Tombstone. The Tombstone thing, honestly, is very misleading. It really does kill a lot more than you realize that it does, even if it's just one, because that early Tombstone catch just on, and then regardless of how many generators are remaining, you just automatically have one less person to worry about. It makes it so much easier to figure out where people are and then just get the full send on somebody else. So I would say that Myers has the really easy time with getting 2 kills very easily, but to get 4 is difficult. I think that there's like a high chance that someone will always make it out versus a Myers, but it's not usually a full party thing in that case scenario. And Wesker's kind of in the same boat. Wesker being 60% also makes sense actually, because like again, the mind game that Wesker can receive from other survivors is actually pretty brutal for them. Where like if he literally misses something, he wastes so much time and has to go back on the chase. So you can do a really good job, no matter what the skill level is, of being able to go on the chase versus Wesker. So him being 60% just makes sense to me too. So I'm actually cool with that. Now we got the top 10 of the rest of the people. So let's see. Executioner, Hag, Artists are both 60. That's interesting. Okay. Xenomorph is 59 along with Blight, which is fascinating to me because I feel like this number is deceptively incorrect. Wraith's number is also deceptively incorrect, but that's just me though. Let's see. Nemesis, Legion, Good Guy, Twins. Who's the lowest? Doctor at 51. That's interesting. I don't really think that it's that low though, but I don't know. It's kind of interesting, actually. Overall average is 58.5. So you know what I think the problem is that because of this number being so high and this number being so low and kind of everything in between, the average being 58.5, I think that literally just tells the developing team that they're doing a good job in terms of balancing, but they're clearly incorrect. I don't mean to like call them out, but a lot of killers have a lot of problems, and a lot of killers are really good at what they do, and they're almost too good at what they do. So there's that. And then we got survival rate in groups. Last, but certainly not least, many of you are curious, about a survivor's odds of escaping depending on if they're flying solo or playing with friends. In this case, a higher survival rate would mean that a survivor is escaping more. We've also included survival rates for high MMR survivors as well as those who are curious. Okay. One last time, let's remind you that the numbers do not paint a full picture. So friends may be more coordinated. They might also be more willing to sacrifice themselves in innocence to their friends. No one does this. I'm telling you that right now. No one. All right. So solo overall is 40.34 and high MMR is 39.42. Interesting. 2 survivors overall can escape less often than a solo player, which is interesting actually. But higher MMR, they escape better. Okay. 3 survivors is a little bit higher again. Higher than solo and survivor, which is interesting at 40.56. Okay. And then high MMR is higher than both of them. So like, okay, it's interesting too. And then 4 survivors, you got 43.09 overall, and then high MMR is 48.30. So here's my issue with this entire thing. Obviously, high MMR is something that it takes consideration, obviously. However, what I'm not really a fan of is that there's a separation of these two numbers in general. Just to be not that there needs to be. I need them to just like, if they're gonna make this kind of separation, they need to do it in 3 ways. Where you have like an MMR ranked mode, you have like the overall percentage out of the entirety of its game, and then you have like the casual more aligned setting. No one really likes looking at the letters MMR together and knowing that the percentage is higher with people versus and lower with no one, right? Like I'm a solo player. My escape rate is probably closer to this number than it is to this number. But I'm less of a high MMR player versus I would fit the overall better, I would say. But again, that variance really does depend because even in my current scenario, like I don't know, there's something really odd about being able to like just play this game and be a solo player, and the fact that my solo play requires me to work with other survivors that I don't know or communicate with is quite a pain actually. Um my rate would be higher despite my MMR if there was an opportunity for myself to personally be able to work on my own self in escaping versus having to actually coordinate with my team that I have no idea who they are in the first place, sort of ordeal, you know? So like I don't want to make a comparison for any kind of games, but like if I had to compare a game with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? Everyone is able to play solo and kind of work on their own means of escape, despite the fact that there's three killers. It works itself out really well, honestly. If there was a way to implement that kind of system in this game to a degree, where I will help out those who want help or can utilize it, but I don't want my survivability to be indicative of the rest of my team because I don't really think that it's fair for myself. That's like me at least though. So that's where I'm at. But this is an interesting piece of information. I would love to understand what this metric is actually for the entirety of 2023. This only covered the previous month. So, we'll see. But that's all that there is to it. So, I mean, I'm very curious about this. I don't know. I feel like the survival rate thing is a really hard pill to swallow because objectively, here's the issue with the survival rate thing. People who play with like a Swift party of 4 players, if it's 4 friends versus 1 killer, obviously no one likes playing 4 player friend mode and having people die. Like that feeling does not feel good, right? Objectively, you want to basically have everyone escape because that's how you technically win, right? You need to learn how to feel good if you don't make it. Like it should feel nice to be like, okay, I did what I can do. I tried my best. I had fun, but nobody feels that way, and that's an issue. And that rule applies to the 3 and 2 survivor as well. There's just less people complaining about what it boils down to. The solo player thing, again, I would like to be able to have my own means of escape without having to rely solely on my teammates because in order for me to complete the objective that I have set for myself, right, I had to complete generators. If I have friends or teammates that I don't know and they're just not doing any generators, my progress gets hindered by their inability or their lack of ability to do generators, which to me is an issue because because if I was able to, again, like if there was just 7 generators and I had to only do 2 of them and then I can escape, and I had no help from my teammates, then at least I can ensure my escape route without having to rely on my team because that'll at least allow me that opportunity to say, hey, I did my part and I'm ready to go home, right? I can't do that in this game. I have to make sure that my team is doing whatever that they're doing in order to actually survive. That's why playing solo is so complicated because you have to actually make sure that your team is involved in some kind of process just to ensure your escape. Because if you somehow had 3 other survivors all dealing with the killer and you were solo gen cleansing all 5 generators, like you still might not make it out alive despite 3 of them spending the entire match just keeping the killer busy, right? That to me is an issue. So either way though, very interesting stats overall for survival rate. In terms of the deadliest killers, the list is interesting. I definitely feel like Skull Merchant, Onryo, Wesker, Myers, Dredge, Spirit, and Cenobite all belong on this list. I don't know about Freddy. Freddy's is interestingly way too high in my opinion, but I don't know. I feel like it's weird. It makes sense, but I don't know. I feel like it should be lower, but I don't know. I can't make that assessment because of how bad the killer is. It's just what it is that it's also because like the killers are just naturally faster than the survivors. So I don't know. It's just a really finicky thing to deal with. Plague makes sense and Pig makes sense. So I'm totally cool with those guys. Last we get the killer picks. I'm content with this list. It does make a lot of sense to me actually, and unfortunately, but it does. I actually understand this to a high degree. I feel like I would have swapped out Ghostface for Doctor, but I don't know. I feel like I do see Ghostface once in a while, but I see Doctor very frequently. But the fact that the numbers are swapped the other way around ain't that big of a deal. Last, we got killer perks. This accurate list is extremely accurate, and it's unfortunate. The perks might be a little bit out of order, but I think all 10 of these perks are on this list. I would just move NOED up maybe a space or two, and then I'd bring Jolt or Surge down a ping or two. Otherwise, accurate list for the killers. And for survivors, pretty much same thing. I'm surprised that Bond is up there. I would have replaced Bond with something else, like I don't know, like Botany or um some kind of other exhaustion. Oh, Balanced Landing. That's actually a much more accurate perk. I would have replaced Balanced Landing with Bond, but I don't. It doesn't say where those perks kind of list are, so I'm curious. But either way, so not bad. Honestly, pretty interesting develop update. I'm pretty intrigued by it, and so we also should be very soon getting a new update on potentially what is the next killer and survivor combo. So definitely keep that in mind. But hope you guys enjoyed this. This update was pretty interesting, statistically speaking. I look forward. I hope they kind of do this more frequently. I feel like we can use like a quarterly review in terms of this update and see kind of what it looks like. But that's my opinion, though. So thank you all so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you guys next time. Take care.